Good afternoon, everybody. This has been a really impressive Congress, and it's been a real joy to be amongst you and to listen to both the thought leaders, the policymakers, the researchers, and the operators in terms of thinking about what is the quality of life for independent living. As Pilar says, I'm going to talk about the UK housing context, but when I worked in government in England, the housing programme was part of an integrated care network that the government set up. So it was actually appropriate that this conference is looking at integration. And the horizontal integration that Robin Miller talked about earlier today around the partnership around our health and social care economies is also important to think about where does our home fit in that, whether as a user of a service, a patient, a client, or a tenant or resident, in terms of their long-term conditions, their dementia, their particular needs, but also how we can maintain and sustain a better quality of life in the variety of homes that we have. And I'm going to share with you some of those over the next 15, 20 minutes or so, because I think it is about how do we build on those partnerships to create an integrated approach. An integrated approach is not about extending or developing even more institutional solutions. We need new models of care and housing that enable people to be interdependent, both to have the autonomy in their own homes, but also to live in communities where they can participate actively, as we've heard through many of the presentations this morning. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about how we refer to that in our UK context, and particularly the development of the age-friendly housing, the age-friendly community approach, very much adopting the World Health Organization's charter, and then also to take forward some of the ideas about that. And as Pilar says, and we're a great fan of the Foundation, Pilar, as well, we're a free network where we want to exchange some of these ideas and provide a learning lab for you to understand what's happening in the UK. And if there are lessons we can share with you, please let us know. But I just want to sort of reflect on the last 10 years or so in England, in particular in the UK. And on one level, while we've heard some great things about the partnerships, the projects, the pilots in the UK, we've also, from a housing perspective, have had a policy, a national policy of indecision in the UK, so much so that a leading parliamentarian said that the UK was woefully underprepared for an ageing society. So over the last 10 years, we've taken what I call a pracademia approach, where we've looked at practical measures and applying academic rigor to see what practice is out there, what is the research base, and in particular, how do we consult with older people and those approaching older age to think what are the types of housing that we need to reflect our lifelong living experiences in our communities. And the key reports, and Pilar mentioned one of those, is the HAPPY report. This is an acronym which stands for Housing Our Ageing Population Panel for Innovation. It's the picture in the middle. But a bit before that, we developed a program called Lifetime Homes, Lifetime Neighbourhoods. And when Pilar talked this afternoon, for those of you in your room, about building more resilience, this is very much the resilient model that we're really keen to develop, because we want to achieve better outcomes and quality of life for all our ageing in the different types of accommodation settings that exist. And it's not just about the bricks and mortar, the walls, the roofs, the windows. It's about the types of social connections and the social activities and the networks that are built. We've heard a lot about how that enables older people to reduce social isolation, create better companionship, and address issues like loneliness. But at the same time, we know that there is a lack of good quality housing choices in England and across the UK indeed, to enable people to make an informed decision to move at their choice rather than having a forced or crisis move into a home or indeed a residential care or nursing home at a crisis point. So it is common knowledge in the UK that we are bed blocking our housing market. Many older households live in 3- and 4-bedroom apartments and houses, yet we could offer much more spacious 2-bedroom apartments with better amenities and facilities in excellent locations to develop much more of a community integrated approach to the housing solutions. And some of that is about how we compress dependency. It's not just about sort of living independence. How can we enable people and prevent them in terms of both their deteriorations in later life and their frailties, but also how can we look at the different types of interventions that we can support? So for those of you who are interested in facts and figures, older people over 65 live in a third of all dwellings in the UK. Our population, like the Spanish one, is ageing significantly. And as we heard from Conchita earlier, over 85s and indeed over 100s, a 100-year life will be the norm in 15, 20 years. But in terms of the availability of housing for an ageing population, we have just under 750,000, 750,000 specialised retirement residences, individual properties in the UK. About 75% of those are in the affordable sector, which that means in the social housing, in the public sector, whether with charities or the local municipality. Yet the majority of older people in England are actually owner-occupiers, about 16.5 million of them. So the availability in terms of the funnel of supply is a very big shortfall. And we've estimated through various predictive modelling tools that we need at least 34,000 new dwellings a year just to meet current demand. And that's just based on some simple actuarial models overlaid with looking at long-term health and social care profiles. Currently, we're lucky if we're building 7,000 units a year. So you can see there's a discrepancy there, and the supply and demand statistics have some real challenges for our policymakers, our planners, and operators trying to meet the growing demand. As I mentioned earlier, a number of people are also living alone, and here again we'll see that increasing, in particular older women and older men, and we need to think again about what is the type of accommodation and type of household that they may want to live in. Is it around single household? Is it around collaborative forms of housing? And that's what I'm going to come and talk to a little bit more. Because in England, our independent living trends are very much reflecting about meeting a tenure diversity, so to both offer accommodation for people who want to own or part buy, or indeed rent, or indeed look at social market rent or indeed social rent. But it also is about how to be care ready, know about what type of accommodation can also be adapted to meet your future care needs. So our approach is what we've called a AAA approach. All properties need to be adaptable, accessible, and also there needs to be at a local level good quality advice for people to make informed decisions. And then local authorities are responsible for looking at the broad management of the stock in their localities to look at how decent it is in terms of the quality of the accommodation and to ensure that there will be future age-friendly standards. And the UK is taking a leading light in looking at also dementia-friendly approaches. So again, there is a growing swell of both meeting that demand, but also to think much more strategically about how we can build both the financial capital, what are the resources available through both our public grants, but increasingly the private sector as well. And you heard a little bit from Robin and Raphael yesterday talking about that entrepreneurial approach, that mixed economy. That's very much where we now sit in. So we can look at both developing new stock and existing stock, but also building on some of that social capital, that resilience that Pilar talked about, and the asset-based development that Libby talked about yesterday, because we very much see that about improving health and well-being, and particularly around compressing dependency. And Conchita earlier talked about sort of like the longevity models in Spain. We have a third approach. So in terms of moving to extra care housing, we don't have as high a dependency level. So instead of having 3 years expected life expectancy, we get between 5 and 9 in some of our extra care. And in some areas also, depending on if you have a lower level of dependency, it can get to about 15 years if people move early enough as well. So those early interventions through housing are important. So at a government level, we've written, and I've written reports for them to say we need a clearer vision about promoting awareness about the attitudes of later living and housing circumstances, How do we make sure our local planning authorities understand how to zone the type of accommodation in very well sought after spots where there are local amenities, access to community hubs? A bit of the things that we heard from Louise yesterday around what's happening here in Barcelona. And importantly, how do we integrate that within the wider health and social care economy? Because in that way, we can make these a sustainable financial package. I don't know if you have a program here called Grand Designs, but it's a very popular UK program where we go every week to look at a property. And some of this is very much aimed at the under 40s. But in fact, half the movers in the UK are later life movers. They're moving for the last time in senior living, at a senior point in their life. So again, we need to think about the types of options available, and the property here on the left is an example of the happy principles, an attractive, desirable home that provides a really good option for somebody either to downsize, right-size, or in sometimes upsize, wanting to move from a smaller apartment to a larger because of the quality of the building, both the interiors, the exteriors, and what the services available on site are. Now, we've heard a little bit about some of the acronyms, but I also want to share with something I've been developing over the last couple of years. And this is about looking at different collaborative models of housing, what I call collaborage. It is a play on the English word collaborate. But there are 6 I's. Now, these may not translate into Catalan or Spanish, but they are very much in part of what we've been talking about over the last 2 days. How do we ensure there's greater involvement with our communities? How do we ensure that they sustain independence? But I'm not going to read all of them because they all link into all the key things that we've highlighted. But one of the things, and again, I'll be interested from Javier's point of view, is again, how do we make our accommodation welcoming? How do we make it inviting? So actually people want to desire to move there. So again, we need to think about our public realm, our spatial standards, but also the impact on our health and well-being about how we orientate and participate in our local communities, whether that's through leisure, lifestyle, friendship groups, and participating in religious and other activities. Because we know from a public health point of view, those are really important measures to improve quality of life. Now, I'm going to got a couple of slides, or 3 or 4 slides here, which are just going to share with you some rolling examples of different types of accommodation types in the UK. Now, the first one is something that's been developed over 400 years in the UK, and in fact, some commentators think as much as 600-700 years ago. And these are almshouses, often related and linked to local churches and local faith communities, where as a part of their role in social responsibility in the day 500 years ago or so, they would support very poor people who are either destitute or in very extreme poverty. So the types of accommodation on the left-hand side are very simple sort of types of communal-based living that was available. And in many of our local communities, in rural communities, and in some town centres, one will always find 5 or 6 little almshouses clustered around a church or a public amenity. What we're seeing is a renaissance of these over the last 4 or 5 years, and the ones on the right are examples that have recently won award-winning standards for their design, but more importantly is their location and their place in the local communities. So again, you can see that there's sort of attractive, desirable type of accommodation that is being designed and developed. But the important thing is not the building, it's the communities that they are located in. We also have a rich tradition of sheltered or retirement living in the UK. I mentioned we have nearly 750,000 units of accommodation. Many of them look like the ones on the left. But again, part of our Decent Home programme, part of the Ministry of Housing's programme to upgrade the stock and the quality of our stock, we've seen new facades being put on, new communal spaces, and new hubs being created. So I've given you a couple of examples where we've created both landscaping space for communal use, as well as where you can have little cafes or meeting points, which are very popular for intergenerational and multi-generational points. So this is not about creating age segregation, it's much more about how we design inclusively into our local communities. And developing those concepts, we're moving very quickly to concepts of co-living. I don't know if that's popular or well known here, but again, these are examples where we're looking at different multi-generational accommodation. The schemes on the left are where you have an extra care or housing with care development located in a cluster of different types and different dwelling types, both rental and in terms of the size of the dwelling of housing, where you can deliver the care into the community, but also have the safety net of the hub based on the extra care village. And you'll hear a little bit more about the community-led and co-housing movement here in Spain. But I just want to give you 3 examples of where this is working really well in the UK. The one on the left is a group of women who've, over the last 20 years, have developed a scheme in North London called New Ground, and they've broken New Ground to get this developed. It's exclusively for women, although they do invite men there, and I've been there several times. But the whole point of this is to create an intentional community where people want to live together independently, but with interdependence, so that they can live mutually and have that reciprocity that we heard about yesterday. The one in the middle has just won a major prize. I don't know if the Sterling Prize in RIBA is well known here in Spain, but it is the leading architectural prize in the UK. And the one in the middle has just won the Alternative RIBA Prize for its community spirit and the creating a new streetscaped housing scheme for older people. So much so that most of the younger people who want to move there, they're invited, but they use the community space, which is the part of the building on the left with the sort of brutalist window. And on the right is an example of a very early co-housing scheme. It's actually in the town that I live, in the southwest of England. It was developed 25 years ago and very much popular with younger families with then children. Most of those children are now at school or indeed gone to university, and the majority of residents there are over 60. This is what I call a naturally occurring retirement community, but the co-living principles of sharing and reciprocity are critical in terms of delivering that. And the impact on their health and well-being is really important. And there's our GP service is just around there, and we know from our primary physicians that they make less use of that because of that reciprocity. But we've also heard about how we can support more planned care. So we're creating a new age of retirement living, and this builds on the extra care that we created in the 2000s. This is a new age which looks at building on the happy design principles. The critical thing here is that each of those has a different relationship with its local community. So the one on the top right has a step-down or intermediate care facility where 5 patients from the local hospital can be discharged and live there for 12 weeks. 95% of people who move into that scheme then move into the discharge flat, then move back into their own home. But the reassurance for the 5% that don't means that they can actually occupy and move into one of the rentals in that attractive sort of courtyard. The one on the bottom right is designed specifically for cultural purposes for the Asian community. So it's very much strengthened on this way, the sunlight, the location, so it points to Mecca and the like. So again, it creates a very important community resource to the local community, which is a predominantly mixed race community in this area of Loughborough in the Midlands of England. The one on the left is a regeneration of a local estate in Stoke, again in the Midlands, a very deprived neighbourhood. In order to create a much stronger community spirit, it developed this large extra care and retirement village with community hub to provide social activities. Again, some of the day opportunities that we heard about from Barcelona yesterday, replicated here on one scheme and now developed across 3 sites across the rest of Stoke. And we're also seeing the private sector coming in, developing very upmarket, desirable but expensive accommodation for people on benefits or people with low and modest means. These are out of their reach. But they do provide some interesting ideas around the design, the construction. And part of this is also to meet the housing challenge that we have in the UK of needing to build 300,000 new homes a year to meet current mainstream demand. So the importance of the community and the like is really critical. So the people, the place, and the partnerships are important. Some of this is integration through design. Some of this is integration just by chance. And the strength of this often is bound together through the personal relationships that both the communities have, but also the professionals have in those locations. And at a government level, we heard a bit about the 4 models of integration, that we have in the UK earlier from Robin and the colleagues. We have in housing integration a memorandum of understanding with all the government departments, understanding that their housing has to play a part in both the regulatory but also the legislative frameworks. And the reason is because our evidence, a bit like you've heard from Conchita earlier, is if we can compress dependency, we can reduce demand on more critical services, and in particular around our acute services and our community and our primary care services, as well as our social care services, both in terms of the way we coordinate the care and support to people in home, but also reduce demand on adult social services. So a couple more minutes, well, not even a couple more minutes, a few more points I just wanted to show you. This building resilience that Pilar talked about, I think there's a three level. One is about how do we encourage the building of personal resilience. Secondly, how we encourage and adopt more community-led approaches to building resilience. And ultimately, can we enable lifelong communities? Now, I've got a series of other slides, but I just want to leave you with one other thing. We're going to miss the video. One of the biggest challenges, I said right at the outset, we need to challenge ageism and some of the institutional behaviours. Let's change that, both through our road signs, but through our practice. Thank you very much.